From the media company wanting to kick Johnny Depp out of the franchise, to the studio ending up with the most confusing lores and myths in the movies, here's how Disney destroyed Pirates of the Caribbean. The worst decision fans thought Disney was making was when they didn't want Johnny Depp as Captain Jack Sparrow. The thing is, after Johnny had a tough time with the case against the Sun newspaper, Disney decided to give him another major setback by blocking his cameo appearance in the next Pirates of the Caribbean movie. It looked like Disney wasn't too keen on the idea of bringing Johnny back, because they were scared that Depp's presence might mess up the film's family-friendly reputation. Now, this was obviously criticized by a lot of friends, who said that this couldn't have been the reason why they wanted to kick Johnny out of the franchise, since Disney had a history of not liking the actor. I mean, Depp himself has openly talked about how the studio actually hated his performance as Captain Jack Sparrow in the first movie, even though that movie became an instant hit at the time. And let's face it, I don't think any of us can imagine a better unhinged Jack Sparrow than Johnny himself, which is why fans acted quickly to fight the studio. Hell, almost 350,000 people signed a petition demanding Disney to bring him back. This definitely wouldn't go well with the studio's reputation, seeing that they haven't been doing a good job with the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Sure, some of the later movies made a ton of money at the box office, but critics haven't exactly been singing praises. The only one that got some love was the first movie, The Curse of the Black Pearl, back in 2003. But then, things kinda went downhill after that, especially when On Stranger Tides was released in 2011. The movie got slammed with the worst reviews of the whole Pirates of the Caribbean series. And the biggest reason was that they basically ditched almost all the characters from the original trilogy. Seems like Disney really loves taking out the OG characters that made this franchise. And because of that, many people thought On Stranger Tides felt kinda light and fluffy. It lacked that tense, high-stakes adventure vibe that we loved in the previous movies. Plus, the release got delayed a bunch, which didn't help either. And here's the thing, they brought in all these new characters, but they couldn't make us care about their standalone story either. Ian McShane's Blackbeard was so underused, it was almost criminal. I mean, they already had a bunch of great villains in the series, like Davy Jones and the East India Trading Company, not to mention the sea goddess Calypso. But instead of building on that rich universe, they kinda just ignored it and threw in some new stuff that wasn't able to build hype. At the end of the day, On Stranger Tides tried to be all funny and lighthearted, but it was too late to shake off the complicated world building from the previous movies. They couldn't just ignore all that history and expect us to buy into this new adventure, right? I mean, they took out Will and Elizabeth completely. And this became another huge problem with the movie, since that meant that Jack ended up being the main protagonist. Now, don't get me wrong, Sparrow is definitely the character that adds that extra level of spice to the movie, but he's also sort of a one-trick pony. Depp's character is always causing trouble, and that's cool and all, but without Will and Elizabeth's growth and development, the heart of the story was just missing. They were the ones with the real journey from young lovers to heroes, fighting against corruption and greed. And without that, the movie just fell a bit flat. Many people also criticized Disney for bringing in Penelope Cruz as Angelica, aka Jack's old flame, because it looked like they tried to do something new with Sparrow's character, when there was never that need. And it's not like Angelica brought out something new in Jack either. While this movie clearly didn't do Sparrow's character justice, Disney also failed to redeem his character in Dead Men Tell No Tales. At least before this movie rolled around, we knew Jack as this clever trickster, always up to something mischievous. But in Dead Men Tell No Tales, they turned him into an average fool. Sure, he has a connection to Henry Turner in the story, which kinda justifies his involvement, but that connection was sorely missed in the early script. They didn't handle him well at all. And even though Jack ended up being the main character, his presence in the movie seemed forced sometimes. And let's also not forget that cringeworthy shotgun wedding scene. Thankfully, Barbossa saved the day with a well-timed intervention. Can you believe they actually had an entire subplot about that in the draft? I'm so glad that it got scrapped because it definitely would have dragged the story down. But this wasn't nearly as bad as the idea of Jack being warned that he'd be killed by his own sword. The movie turned it into a running gag, because Jack keeps throwing the sword away, only for it to come back to him like magic. Seriously, what was the point of that? This added nothing to the story and only made Jack look even more silly. Sadly, the problems with Dead Men Tell No Tales don't just stop at Jack's character. The movie was a letdown in many other ways too. One of the things that didn't work out at all was that the movie tried to blend the old and new stories from the Pirates of the Caribbean universe. Because, at the end of the day, instead of being a brilliant mix, it ended up damaging the original trilogy story, while still keeping that bizarre cartoon vibe from On Stranger Tides. The problem was that the movie had the light-hearted tone of On Stranger Tides, so nothing really felt impactful. But at the same time, they were trying to juggle the complex lore from the earlier trilogy, which made the whole story a tangled mess that was impossible to follow. They had some moments that should have been epic, like Will and Elizabeth making their grand return, or the big revelation about Karina being Barbossa's daughter. But it all fell flat because the stakes in this movie were never built properly. Oh, and let's not forget Barbossa's sacrifice. They tried to pull off this emotional moment, but it felt fake since the dude had already died and had been brought back to life before. It's like Disney didn't even know how to handle their own characters anymore. And because so many new things were introduced, the movie ended up being a weird mix of standalone adventures and a desperate attempt at still making it into a continuation of the larger story. While they tried doing that though, Disney also ended up creating a huge mess when it comes to the theology in the world of Pirates of the Caribbean. In Dead Men Tell No Tales, they dropped a bombshell that Poseidon's trident holds all the sea curses, and when you break it, all curses are gone. Alright, cool. But wait, does that mean that something as powerful as a god's trident can be broken? Not only that, but introducing Poseidon into the movie raised many questions about the different types of gods and goddesses that we were introduced to before. First, we got Calypso, the goddess of the sea. Then there are those Aztec gods who cursed Cortez's treasure back in the first movie. It isn't clearly explained what roles these deities have in this world, whether they actually exist or something that people just believe in. Also, let's not forget that when Poseidon is talked about in this movie, they mention his trident a lot, but they also find it in his tomb. So the question this raises is, do gods die in this universe? If yes, then what happened to other Greek gods that were mentioned in the previous movies? This isn't even the most confusing part yet, because remember that magical sword of Triton from On Stranger Tides? The one that Blackbeard used to control his boat? If that exists, does that mean that Triton, a whole other sea god, exists in this universe while Poseidon was there too? Oh, and don't even get me started on the voodoo magic. Just the fact that it exists in Pirates of the Caribbean movies means that there's also a whole set of Loa gods in the mix too. Clearly, Disney itself couldn't keep up with the insanely confusing rules and myths that they were introducing in these movies. At some point, they even stopped explaining where some of their lore came from. And this includes the story behind the Fountain of Youth, since it came with some strange and specific laws that have no backing either. So, there you have it. From the studio ending up with the most confusing lores and myths in the movies, to the media company wanting to kick Johnny Depp out of the franchise, that was how Disney destroyed Pirates of the Caribbean.